Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Jasperson. Welcome to the campus of Bethany Lutheran College. We affectionately call this the YFAC. It's the Ylva Fine Arts Center. And we're here for this installment of our monthly guest artist series with Charlie Putnam. Charlie has exhibited in this space before, back in the 1990s, had a solo show here.
Earlier than that, too, before this building.
He exhibited before this building existed with the art department. And so we have a long relationship with Charlie here at Bethany. He's from St. Peter. He's a working artist, an educator at many different levels, gallery director, and already his work has been causing some great discussion, some great interest among the student body, and we're here to learn more. Please join me in welcoming Charlie Putnam.
Okay, well, thank you. All this is true, and I'm not sure how well you can read from way back there. Thanks very much, Jason, for inviting me to come here. And he put together this show. He was in charge of arranging everything and really did this much differently than I would have. I think if I had done this, it would be really boring. I think with the way he did it, he managed to really mix things up. We're going back to the early 80s with some things here, and then up until probably the last couple weeks ago for the last things that are hanging like down in the hallway. And he managed to mix them up really well. So thank you for that. Over the weekend, I got one vehicle loaded up with help from Colleen and Amanda, and we got that car all full, and it took quite a while to get everything done. I've been having some trouble. I'm getting a hip replacement surgery done here in about a month, but at any rate, we got the car loaded up, and when I got here, the students were here to help with Jason. And they had the car unloaded in 10 minutes. They had everything down here. It was wonderful. So I went back to the house. I picked up a van. That's a long story I don't want to tell. But I loaded up with the larger things because I had these 2 triptychs and then a couple of the other larger pieces that needed a bigger than my Honda Fit to carry over here. And once again, by the time I got here, it took maybe 5-10 minutes to unload the car, fold up all the blankets to go back to A to Z. And by the time I got down here, they had already started setting up the show. So that was just absolutely wonderful. And such nice people to work with, and so helpful and encouraging. And thanks very much to my friends and family that are here and have been supportive for all the years. This was really fantastic. Thank you. So we can get started. I'm going to start with some kind of notes here because otherwise I'm likely to just ramble and not get to anything. So these are me. Josh Madsen does his community collage things. I don't know how many are aware of his community collage pieces that he does. And he'd been asking me for a long time, he wanted to take my picture, and I was there at one of his events one time and I didn't really want my picture taken, and someone else was getting theirs taken. I thought, okay, that's good. I just was not in the mood for that. But anyway, I finally get down to the tremendous brewery where he was doing one of his photo shoots. And there was a long line, and people would get up there, and he had standing on boxes, and they had music, and they were dancing and all this stuff. It was finally my turn, and I said, you know, I really don't want to dance. I don't want to stand up on one of these blocks. I just want my picture taken. And so he goes, look here. I looked there, and he snapped the picture. I said, perfect. And he started laughing. And we went, should we do a one and done? Yeah, let's do that. And so he announced that it was one and done, and so everyone's laughing about that. And I thought he got a good shot. The other one, I think, is from the years and years of faculty pictures for the yearbook. And so after 30 years of taking pictures for the yearbook, I always wanted to make a flip book out of them, so you could watch me get old, watch my hair fall out. But I didn't do that. And this one I did for a show in Minneapolis, where they wanted me to do a color poster or postcard. And color postcards at that time were really expensive. And so I thought, I want to fix them. I'm going to do a black and white picture. And I did a black and white painting. I painted one of my masks over the top of a photograph of myself. And it worked out well. So we can move on. We'll see more masks later. Okay, this stuff is all true. I was an art educator here at Mankato State. I was at LeSueur Henderson. I taught art ed and studio classes for MSU. 28 years there and 29 years in Henderson. And now I think I've been retired since was it 2014 and 2015, I guess. I was done with public school first, and then a year later I finished with Mankato State. And since then, I've been making art in my own space. Instead of trying to convince kids that it's a fun idea, I just do it on my own. I always think it's fun. After my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, I ended up going back and getting certified to teach in public schools. And with that, you get a K-12 license to teach anything from kindergarten through 12th grade. And I did all those at one point or another, and it always would depend on what they needed at the time. And it was like, a couple of weeks usually before the school started, they go, "Hey, come on in here for a minute, Charlie. This is what this year looks like. And you're going to go to LeSueur for part of the day, and you're going to be back in Henderson for part of the day, or you're going to be up at the high school for part of the day." And it was kind of hectic at times, but it kept me going. In between those times, I worked at a boat factory in Mankato, and that was close to 2 years. And I worked at the state hospital in St. Peter for nearly 2 years. I don't know how I did all those things and went to school at the same time, but I did. I showed up one day at the college, and someone had just backed out on a graduate assistantship. I walk into the office just to say hi to people. I go, "Hey, Charlie, you want a job?" "Yeah, I'll take a job." I was driving car parts around part-time at that point. And so I had already started my graduate credits. I had the fortunate and unfortunate circumstance of being able to be funded for school through my dad's GI Bill. He was a disabled veteran. And so I had funding, and when I got my BFA, I still had like a half a year left. Geez, I might as well keep going. So this is covering my rent, and it's doing that. It's kind of barely covering my rent, but anyway, it was better than most options I had. So I did the graduate assistantship, and that took me through a full year. And by the time I was done with that, then I was very close to being done with all my credits for the master's degree. After that was done, about a year later, I got a job teaching at LeSueur Henderson. At that time, it was just Henderson. I think the population was 700 on the sign when you roll into town. I was also hired as the district librarian. And I thought, well, how tough can that be? Why was I wrong? There's a lot of things I sure didn't know. A lot of things that I needed to learn. So I went back to school because I needed to get certified to keep the job that I had. And I got certified in library media here at MSU. And so that gave me a Bachelor of Science teaching degree or something. Okay. So that's enough school. The way I like to work, I guess a lot of it is I like to play around with materials. I like trying different techniques. A lot of times I just start messing around with stuff until something starts to happen. And some of the things I learned along the way is, well, if you do something that you like over here that happens, maybe you should try and repeat that or have some kind of an echo of that thing somewhere else on the same picture. And at some point, things really start to take shape. And then an idea will form at some point. A lot of times I don't start out, I didn't start out with the idea that I'm going to have people swimming in a pond with turtles swimming around. That all kind of happened as the painting process started and continued from there. I guess, I knew I wanted water. I knew I wanted it to be about people swimming, I guess. But on the other hand, I didn't have this idea in my head and say, well, I'm going to make one of these, and then go off and make that thing. It's more that I would work with materials, and then that thing kind of just happens to appear in my head or and through the manipulation. So, in other words, I just like to fool around with stuff until my ideas happen. Okay, so there's a lot of different phases here. We go back to 1982, and there's quite a few things through the 80s and into the 90s, some in the early 2000s, and then I reached a point where I just kind of made a fairly big shift in doing these more geometric abstractions. And so there's a lot of threads or little groups of things that make sense or group together. But on the other hand, it's not like this is really in any kind of a linear sequence, because things just kind of go happen here, happen here, happen here. It's not like you could write a story about, well, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. It doesn't work that way. I don't know that it does for anyone. Teaching. Anywhere from kindergarten, and by the end of the day, a lot of times it was college students. And so they were either in art education courses or in beginning level studio courses, and even drawing and painting somewhere along the line. Over in, I did some extended campus, so I took trips to Owatonna, to New Ulm, Fairmont. Is that it? Huh, seemed like it was more than that. But I think I really found a home when I finally started doing the elementary ed and art education all together with that. I didn't do a lot of the senior high. It was mostly art, elementary teachers that are needing their certification, and they had to have art as part of that teaching degree and learning how to teach art with kids. So I tried to convince them that kids really love art and that they should have that opportunity. And I always tried to make sure that, or not make sure isn't the right word for that, but trying to get them enthused about, hey, I can do this. You don't need a fancy art room. I did art on a cart for 25 years. I pushed a cart with my stuff on it around to different areas, and we did art on their desks. And most of the things that I did with students, they could do on their desktops. And if we painted, I'd bring a pitcher of water in and a bucket to put wastewater in, and we'd make do with that. And then a lot of times, because I knew the librarian really well, we would take the pictures, these wet pictures, and put them out on the tables. Because the librarian couldn't really complain about that. I'd have to talk to myself, and that would be do that. So, I got a lot of inspiration out of students, and I think a lot of it was, I especially right after lunch, for some reason, the way the schedules worked, the little ones would be back in from playground, and so they would be ready for their specialist teacher to come and do their class. And they were so great because they'd come in, and I was their favorite thing for the day. And then tomorrow would be gym was their favorite thing. The day after that, music would be their favorite thing. But when they came into my classroom, art was their favorite thing. And sometimes, and some of those students would, you'd give them an idea on some materials, and they might be done in 5-10 minutes. And some of those kids, you'd almost have to pry the stuff out of their fingers at the end of the time because they would be so far into it that they didn't want to stop. And there were also times when I'd walk by and someone would be working on a painting, and I'd be thinking, man, I'd like to take that right now. I'd go and hang that in my house. But then 10 minutes later, I'd walk by and the whole thing would be, all that color mixing. What happens is everything turns brown after a while. Hey, what's going on here? Hey, Mr. Putnam, look, I made a tornado. That's a really cool tornado. I like that. And so that was kind of my day. And another thing about the young students, as much as beautiful as their work was, you'd try and encourage them to roll that up. Let's get that home and show mom and dad. And a lot of times that stuff would get folded up. Sometimes it might get lost at the drinking fountain on the way back to their regular classroom, or maybe it would be lost getting on the bus at the end of the day. Who knows? But for that moment that they're in there working, it was really important to them. And I just really admired that energy and the spontaneity of that. And I look back and try and bring that to myself a little bit more. Like was it Picasso said, it took him years to learn to paint like Raphael and the rest of his life to learn to paint like a 5-year-old. So this was something I would do with like first or second graders, kindergartners. They would just take strips of paper and they would color on them. And the only rule was it had to go onto the paper somewhere and it had to go off the paper somewhere else. I took the same idea up to my last class that I did with elementary art up at MSU, and they did that. And they got up and they put their little installation together, and they really had fun doing that. They were pretty excited about it when they were done. And I think that's one thing I tried to instill with the future teachers was that, let the kids get excited about this stuff. They're really going to enjoy it. And especially if you put things up. And when they have kids in or parents in for conferences, they like to be able to look at work that their students are doing. They don't want to look at a grade book and talk about that stuff. They like to see what their child has done. And also, it was really nice when the kids could point out their work and know which one it was. Because otherwise, they'd have to look behind each one to see which cornucopia was theirs up there. And so I tried to impress that the teachers could do a lot with kids to spark their imaginations and to get them excited about doing art. I graduated with my fine arts degree. I was into ceramics. This is a demo at the old Student Union. You can see the stockade wall behind there for anyone that's familiar with that space. And that used to be around the outside of where the tables were where people ate and drank coffee. We had a salt fire kiln. We dumped salt into the kiln at the right temperature when the glazes had reached temperature. And the salt in the fire is really kind of a deadly gas. And so we'd throw the salt in the kiln and we'd run inside real quick with holding our breath. and you'd wait for the air to clear. And I remember in December going up there and we'd be firing from wet clay from greenware and all the way up to 2,000 degrees for the glaze. And we'd be sitting there and watching to make sure the flame didn't go out, because you have to start really, really slow to be able to get that clay to come to temperature without getting hot too fast and breaking. So the salt firing was pretty exciting. And I put this up because, well, it's the only one that breaks the mold of being the earliest one in 1982. This is when I came back to Mankato State. I had been up in St. Cloud for a year, going to school up there. And I had learned somewhat of how to use a potter's wheel. And I was never really that interested in making bowls or coffee cups. And when I got here, I thought, well, it's time to start doing something with these throne shapes. And so I made these abstract figures. And I still have this one. And there's a slab and wheel thrown pieces and a raku firing. Well, the raku firing, you bring the clay up to temperature, in this case about 1,800 degrees. And then when it's at 1,800 degrees, you take it out of the fire. There you've got two people with picking it up with tongs. And then it goes into a post-firing situation where here you can see newspaper around. It would be put inside some kind of a garbage can. And then that clay would be burning with that extra fuel in there, and the glazes and everything would be burning without oxygen. And you'd have to, every once in a while, you'd want to lift up and just, if nothing else, to check it out. But it could be pretty volatile because all of a sudden there's air hitting that fire. And so I remember more than once of taking the lid off a garbage can and having a ball of flames going off over our heads. Kind of dangerous. It was really fun. I really do believe this, that I think we take in so much stuff through our senses, and it all just kind of gets mixed up in there, and at some point your brain just kind of poops it out, and in my case, in a form of my art. And so I grew up in Owatonna. Steele County Fair was a big deal. I'm not sure if that's where this picture is from. It looks like it could be. And then this James Ensor painting the Procession of Christ into Brussels. I've always wanted to see that painting. It's out in California. It's out in Los Angeles. I've been thinking of taking her a couple of days and going out there. But I made one. And I've got some recognizable people in here, including myself and a friend. And I've got Hannibal Lecter who's in there. And in the 60s, the fair had the carnival would always have, for no better words, they'd have girly shows. I remember there being like 3 of them in one year in the carnival. They had a big carnival in Owatonna. It's like the second biggest county fair in the state by far. And so that's where that comes from, the exotic lobster girl. 1982, collage, probably a supermarket tabloid for the woman with the yellow hat. Those, unfortunately, are my feet. And it looks like I used either some kind of chalk pastel pencil on top of the paint. And I got a note back from the person doing the postcard here and saying, well, this is really greeny. I said, well, look at the signature. You can read the signature really well. It's really clear as the painting is kind of a fuzzy painting. And I did get her a little bit better picture. And so it turned out really nice on the postcard. I chose this one because on the left-hand side, I'm using a medium transfer where you use like an acrylic matte medium and you put printed material face down on that. You let that dry completely, and you wash the paper away. And then the image comes out fairly clear. And to bring that image out a little bit more, I'd put another coat of a matte medium over the top of that to kind of bring it into focus and then kind of freeze it at the same time. And then I thought, well, this was the 80s, and so there was a lot of kind of punk, new wave rock going on. And I look at the poster on the wall and I think, well, that's a new band, I think, but it almost looks like it could be a band from the 60s. Maybe even from the British invasion of the mid-60s. And so he's kind of being laughed at by those two guys. If we remember their names, I hope not, you know who they are. Well, here's a story. And I've got someone that could collaborate this story with me on this, but we're heading back from a family reunion in Iowa. We were just north of Stewartville, just on the north edge of Stewartville. Someone 2 cars ahead of us decided all of a sudden they had to get their dog to let him out, and they stopped suddenly to turn off the road. Well, I had to hit my brakes pretty hard. We were speeding up because we're leaving town, and I automatically turned my wheel to the right so if I could avoid hitting that car if it got that close. Well, I ended up busting off a wooden pylon about that big around and just snapped it like a twig. We slid right into a parking lot. But before that happened, we got hit by a semi. We got rear-ended by a semi. Well, the semi is laying on its side, and cows started getting out of the trailer. And they're wandering around, and there's people gathering around. They don't know what to do with these cows. And so the woman that's got her hands like this she got out of the car and said, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." And so we're looking at the truck, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, is this guy going to be okay? The truck is laying on its side. And all of a sudden, here comes this guy, crawls out of the truck, out of the cab, and proceeds to take his artificial arm off. So that's what that picture is about. That picture isn't in this show. And there was a family reunion one that I didn't include in the slide presentation. When that accident happened in the summer of '84, Christine was about 4 months along, I suppose, somewhere in there. Okay. And so the day she was born, everybody was napping and sleeping, and I had this really vivid dream because we knew she was going to be born that morning on the 7th via C-section. We got there, and they said, well, unless somebody shows up in advanced labor, you're going to have the New Year's baby on the 7th of January. Okay. So I had some ideas about this dream that I had, and I made this little painting. It's about as big as a postcard. I'm not sure what happened to that painting, but I had a picture of it. At the time that happened, I was working at the state hospital with the developmentally challenged. And while working with those people, I was watching our daughter grow up and learning to crawl and learning to walk and learning to talk. And so I kind of developed this character, this little red-haired character. You're riding a trike and you're flying through the air. I used to like to fly her around the house like she was Supergirl. And I would do just weird things like the cat walking or standing on the water. Or these little guys. I've never really had a good name for those guys, the guy dancing around in the woods. And there's Christine when she was working at the pet store. And she got a job working at a pet store when she was just barely done with junior high. And the people that she had been down there so much just looking at things, and they hired her. And then she worked there all the way through high school, and even I think end of the first year after high school, she still worked with them. And I just saw a couple of those people at a gathering here about a year ago. Okay, there's not everything is made up here. The faces come from the pictures that you take every year when you're doing the faculty pictures for the yearbook. And of course, they would give you all the different sizes. Here's the wallet size, and here's the frame size, the 8 by 10. Here's this one, this one. I never really knew what to do with any of those, but I had them all. And so every once in a while, I'd use them to make art with. And so I have the artist, the curious one, the farmer, and the, I don't know, what would you call that guy? Some kind of a guru, I suppose. But not everything is made up here. That's our Australian Shepherd with crown. I must have had a milk bone treat in my hand. So I think that was a major birthday for her. They're only supposed to live to be like 10. And I think that was at least her 10th birthday. I did lots of masks with kids. And these masks were done by the elementary students over in Le Sueur. And this was just a small little sample we had in the mall, which is now gone in Le Sueur. We just covered the walls in there, and there was probably at least 100 of these masks that just covered the walls all the way down. It looked really cool. It was a nice way to teach symmetry. I also did masks with my junior high students, paper mache things. Sorry for this picture at the top. I'm not a photographer, and I don't know. This is not a great picture, but I thought it was pretty cool. I'm guessing this is 1987, and it was my 7th graders that year. It looks like it was spring, and I got them all to put the masks on and stand out in front of the building. And I'm pretty sure I know who this one is, and I'm not positive about the one with the Hawaiian shirt. When I was in high school, my art teacher, in those days, we'd have art classes, and he'd walk in, and they'd give us a list of materials that we needed to buy. And say you needed to have, you should have a sketchbook, you should have this kind of pencil, you should have this, and this kind of eraser. And we'd all go down to the hobby store and buy that stuff. And it didn't seem like a big deal. That was just expected that we would do that. And then he would also suggest things, like I wanted to paint with, do canvas paintings, and I got some oil paints as a gift. And he taught me how to do some oil painting. He also sent me down to the bookstore to buy this Andy Loomis figure drawing book. And this was a 1943 edition. I think mine was a 69 edition, but I'm pretty sure they're the same. And so these little figures, that I would look at those and kind of sweat them out, and draw them on sketchbook paper, and then I would collage them into bigger pictures later. And so this would be one of those, and you can recognize at least the guy walking towards us from the pages that we just looked at. And so what I would do a lot of times is you can tell I did some chalk and some matte medium, and just kind of created this just random rainbow thing going on over the whole paper. And then from there, I put in a wall and kind of a horizon line. I put in a door for us to be able to get out of that picture and kind of let our eyes wander out of this enclosed space. And they were basically, my work was done kind of as a collage at that point. The things were just, I would cut out these figures and I would move them around and say, oh, this kind of works together. And I would glue them down. And I started doing kind of twisted things with all the masks. And I think in 1990, there was a lot of talk and a lot of worry about social disease, especially AIDS, and a lot of precautions being taken as far as working with sharps in the art room and that type of thing, and washing blades off with alcohol, all kinds of things, precautions that were taken. And this to me just seemed like I have a snapshot of indiscreet encounter. And I also used, I think from probably Rolling Stone magazine, I just randomly put those pictures together. And I ended up selling that painting, and I also ended up getting a couple of awards with that painting. I don't know. Happens. Now this is one I found in my slides when I had my slides done. And that is my name there. I did not remember making that painting. And there's another one like it. I don't know how big it is. I really don't have an idea. I don't know if there's, how much collage is there. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, that fish, I was just kind of dumbfounded by seeing this picture. I only decided to only show one of them. There's another one. I think I know where they might be. I've got a couple of boxes in my basement. One of these days I'm probably going to look, but it's kind of like looking for a bat. You know, you might know it's down there, but you don't want to go and look for it right away. You might want to wait a little while until you're really ready for it. This is towards the end of my mask phase. I hope, is that very clear from back there? From up here it looks kind of fuzzy. Maybe it's just me that's getting fuzzy. I continue to do masks after I've stopped doing them in pictures, doing the little cutouts. So, you know, an assemblage of found objects, junk. You know, I did take the time to glue all those nails around. I would go to the thrift stores and I'd find these wooden rings that people would do some kind of needle point or something with, I think. And they always worked out pretty well for these type of sculptures. I also got involved in some printmaking along the way. And one of the things I wanted to do was work with masks with that. I also did those out of clay. And I did this kind of Louise Nevelson kind of a painted wood construction. And I like that Nevelson idea of just painting everything black so all you see is the shapes and the shadows. Now, I retired in 2014, 2015. I had a show at the Carnegie, and Hope Cook, the person that ran the Carnegie at that point, I thought I was going to have the rotunda room and one of the rooms off to the side. She goes, "Oh, you've got all three rooms." And I'm like, "What?" And so I did manage to, I had a whole bunch of iPad drawings that I had printed. And I managed to fill everything else up. And this is called Victory Dance, of course. And I used a scrap box. One day the kids were working and I dug some stuff out of the scrap box and made this little cutout and went home and finished it actually pretty quickly. This painting is here. This was also in that show at the Carnegie, and it was intended to be, I painted them at the same time and didn't exactly think of them as a triptych, although I knew that I wanted them to hang together, which I guess that makes it a triptych. But I didn't have anything real fancy as far as equipment using at that time. I had a T-square, and then I was either using like a pizza pan or a big plate, and it looks like I was using a caliper for at least for the red leg there, and maybe little pieces of it here and there, and maybe some smaller plates or even a big glass that I was able to get these circles drawn. At the beginning of this whole stage of geometric things, I was just basically finding things to trace in my garage, in my toolboxes and stuff. And I had a bunch of wooden spoons. And so this one's made up of wooden spoons, and it's about taking the bus through San Francisco. And we were going out to the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood and riding with some interesting characters on the bus. And I like the idea of working with black and white. Something I like to start doing, and sometimes I cave in eventually and start putting color in it. But if I can stick to my guns and work with black and white all the way through, I really enjoy doing that. After retirement, took some trips to Europe. This was the first one. Went to Rome, Orvieto, Venice. Where was I in between? Where's the Duomo?
Florence.
There you go. I sometimes forget stuff. And then, so everywhere you'd look, there was all these beautiful reflections. The light was amazing. 400 and some bridges there, 438. And so I would go back to where we were staying at the end of the day, and I would make little drawings in the sketchbook. And then when I got home, I turned one of those drawings into this little painting. I managed to get a couple of little watercolors done during that time too. Before we went on those trips, I had gotten some grant funding. And so in my budget, I budgeted for printing. I would take photographs and then I would send JPEGs into the local printer in St. Peter. I found that was a lot cheaper doing that than supplying my own printer, like by a lot. And so I had a lot of pictures of reflections in the water. And some of those I manipulated with my iPad. And then within this collage, I see the bikini with the hot peppers. We were at a farmer's market in Venice, and it was a beautiful farmer's market. All kinds of fresh fish and all this great big bowl of these red peppers I took a picture of. And there was an eel. And the eel was, everything was very fresh there in this farmer's market. This eel was very fresh. That sucker was trying to get away. He was trying to get out of the net that he was in. And I had stuff sitting out when I was getting ready for the show. And this is one I kept looking at and thinking, yeah, I think I really like this one. Okay. We traveled shorter distance things too. The largest ball of twine in the world. And that's not actually true. But this is of a certain type of twine because there's a couple of balls of twine that are larger than the one in Darwin. Just off of the cornucopia, the way northern shore of, south shore of Lake Superior, but very, very most northern point of Wisconsin, I think. We took a boat tour and we got to look at the ice caves. And I was amazed at how much weight was above those rock formations and how they would be balanced and sitting on and almost like pinpoints. All that weight just focused on where those triangles are kind of meeting there. And so I did one of my geometric abstractions of that idea. And then Picasso. I guess I've just always been a fan of his. Well, ever since I saw his work at the Walker that time, they had the kind of a retrospective there. Another one where I managed to stay black and white. Guernica. I was very fortunate to see Guernica in Madrid. Beautiful painting. We got there and there was all these kids sitting around. They were on a school tour. What's a better word for that? Anyway, they're all sitting there and I'm thinking, oh geez, here's this big painting and there's all these bodies in here. But then they got up and left. And there was no one else in there for like 10, 15 minutes, and we were in there with Guernica. It blew me away. And the range of grays and how warm and how cool some of those were amazed me, because it just doesn't show up in books. Gauguin was another favorite. Saw a Gauguin exhibit at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. I ended up buying this as a poster, and that's been in the living room, in the TV room for decades. And so that's deeply imprinted in my brain. And I always like how he would see edge as line, and how his work was very linear, but yet not, but he uses those edges together to make them linear. And of course, I love his sense of color. And this one especially with, I can't imagine the ground being anything but red. Of course, it wasn't red. It was really arbitrary that, hey, red is what's going to make this painting pop. That's going to make that look really good. I'm guessing that's what he's thinking. And that's Jacob wrestling with the angel after the sermon, or the vision after the sermon. I've seen a couple of titles of that. And so here my color was purple. Any Vikings fans in here? For the last, 50 some years that I've watched them lose the last game of the season. And so I'm indeed bleeding purple there. And I remember saying something that I probably shouldn't have said around my child. And when that last play that blew the game for the Vikings in the playoffs, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm just out of my mind. And that number 9, who wore it as Tommy Kramer. Another guy, Philip Evergood, is a social realist that I got involved in studying him when I was doing my master's degree. He was the president of the Artists Union. He was part of the Federal Art Project, which was kind of a sub of the WPA. And the Federal Art Project had an easel division, it had a mural division, it had an education division. The education division had Victor Lowenfeld, who worked out of the University of Minnesota. And he's like the granddaddy of contemporary art education. So he's very highly revered. And he did something called the Owatonna Project, or I grew up in Owatonna. And I was oblivious to all that, but then you could start to see what he did with that project and how his whole thesis was art as a way of life. And so people started seeing art as how they designed their gardens, how they presented their houses, and all those things that we don't think of. And when you start to think about, well, where does design come into our life? Take a look around. Take a look at what you're wearing. Everything. Your shirt, pants, socks, glasses, you name it. It's all there. Someone designed that for you. And there's Philip in the chair there. You can see his a profile. And probably a couple of his better known paintings, especially the one on the left, the Lily and the Sparrows. And that one is in the collection at the Whitney. Although I've been to the Whitney a few times and it's never been on the walls, unfortunately. I took these through glass, so I'm sorry about that, but I wanted you to know that that's where these paintings came from. There's a story about Philip going on a tour with a photographer, I believe, and I think he was on Amazon at some point. And there's the American Shrimp Girl, and some pictures of him through his biography in the book that I have. And then some guys dancing around a fire. And this one, I put myself in this reclining figure pose. And one thing I've always liked about Evergood is how he would put something in this picture, and instead of giving it perspective, he would just flatten that stuff out. And so these, instead of making these tiles go like back into space, he would just make that a pattern. And the thing that I had fun with this is I made the chickens, I made those on tracing paper. So I painted on top of the tracing paper, and you can see parts of what's underneath the tracing paper. Especially if you look down on that one, you can see the squares kind of peeking through. But all the other stuff was either things from my house or sculptures that I made. And I'm not sure about the lady with the fruit bowl on her head. Europe, the first couple days in Rome, I don't think I saw a painting. We saw lots of architecture, lots of sculpture, and all I could think about was math. I could think about all these shapes and all these constructions and all the wonderful structure that an arch is, and how much weight it can support and how it allows things to pass through it and go underneath it. And I heard at a lecture here once that the Roman Colosseum is about the same dimensions and capacity as the Los Angeles Coliseum. And the Roman Coliseum could be emptied out if there was some emergency or something, could empty out in under 10 minutes, like 8 minutes or something. Everyone in there could be out. So amazing design. Being at the Sistine Chapel and seeing the Last Judgment painting, I was inspired to do one of my geometric abstractions and doing this Last Judgment piece. A friend of mine had purchased that, and a good friend that lives in Indiana now. And pictures taken in Europe, used as collage pieces, and linoleum block print, both taken from the Garden of Eden, the original sin, disobeying God and eating the apple and getting the boot. And on this one, I was working on that figure on the left, and I decided to put a Band-Aid there, and that's where the missing rib is.
Missing what?
Rib.
Oh.
You remember? I kind of remember that story from way, way back. Okay. Music and dancing have been a big part of what I've done for a long time. I use some actual cutout figures from a magazine. There's some from the book. Here's some a little bit more random cartoony ones. And then more recently in my linoleum block prints. I have a couple of paintings that are named after dances from the 60s. I always kind of like the one on the left because the medium transfer that I used underneath and some of the vertical shapes in there really make it look like glass to me. And then the other one was kind of inspired by a Halloween dance at the state hospital, which was interesting. I've always been a fan of I think we're just blessed to have the Mankato musicians that are around Mankato and have stayed around Mankato. One of them being a friend of mine, bought the painting on the left, and during the pandemic, he finally did a recording of all his own music. I think all but 2 songs were written by him. And he calls me up one day and asked me if he could use the painting that he bought for a CD cover. I said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I was really happy for that. And I got some free CDs to give to friends, and that was good. I'm happy for that. I think there's so many influences, and this is just kind of a cross-section. One of my favorite all-time sci-fi movies, The Day the Earth Stood Still. It was made in 1951. And so much of your imagination went into that. It was not a big high-tech thing at all. I mean, it was really kind of low budget at that time. But just really a great story. I'm a Dan Brown fan, and I think Origin was my favorite of his books. I ended up reading that one twice. And one of the reasons for that is that it opens up in Bilbao, Spain, where we had stayed and gone to the Guggenheim there. And he's describing the Guggenheim for like the first couple hundred pages and that whole area. And I had been there, so I knew exactly what he was talking about. But it also is a huge introduction to artificial intelligence, which is kind of like, whoa. And you knew that was possible, but 10 years ago, we have a little different perspective on that now already. The Quiet Librarian was written by a guy here in town, Alan Eskins. And to me, that was a book about empathy and about the dangers of profiling people by race and by religion. And the story is really quite good. I don't know how many people in here have read his books. He was an attorney here in town. He lives out on one of the Jefferson Lakes. Horton Hears a Who. It was kind of my introduction to infinity and the just mind-boggling ideas about infinity. In his case is infinite smallness. And, you know, for a kid that's 8 years old, you're thinking about that. And it's like, oh, wow. Technology. I had a hard time giving up my flip phone. And it was hard getting used to having those little numbers instead of the rotary dial is really handy. And then this is probably one of my favorite records of all time. We did a movie about that, A Complete Unknown, here a couple of years ago. And so I can blame Dr. Seuss for this. I was laying in bed one night and I couldn't sleep. Why couldn't I sleep? I'm laying there thinking about infinity in the middle of the night. How am I supposed to sleep if I'm thinking about something that's hard to even, you can't comprehend it. Another one of those people that were having a discussion about nothing and trying to decide what nothing actually means and how you could describe the idea of the word nothing. What does that mean? Well, it means no thing. But is that a physical thing, or is that a thing like an emotion? So you get deeper and deeper into that. So these guys are having a discussion. Someone walks in and says, well, what are you talking about? Nothing. It was a painting I had done earlier. I ended up redoing it. I was going to gesso over the whole thing, and then I decided there was enough there to hang on to. And so I kind of darkened in over the fish at the bottom and really changed and mostly took things out and tried to have it make more sense. The morning news is a little picture of my screen porch. Someone coming by and I'm getting the local scuttlebutt. And sometimes the morning news is a little scary. In this case, my sister's house got hit in the '98 tornado. I believe that's our daughter in my sister's house. That's. What do you think? It looks like her. Yeah. And so her house kind of got about half of it got blown away. Okay, the other half of it was fine, but just on the house next door to the half of her house that was fine, that house was gone, like Wizard of Oz, out of here. The roof landed about a block away. And I think there were like 4 vehicles in their backyard. And way at the end of their lot, there was a pickup truck that was parked, or it was not parked, it was laying on its side. And I'm thinking, how big of a tractor would you need? It was a full-size pickup truck to haul it all the way down there. And they said, well, yeah, it was parked across the street. And I thought that was just crazy. And then later I found out it was not just parked across the street, it was in a garage when the tornado hit. It was one of my first experiences with UPO. and inspired by the tornado. Small, 4 by 6, I think. This was an invitation for a show that was up at Gustavus. It was in connection with the theme for the whole show was wind energy, I believe. And they invited a bunch of local artists to submit a piece for that show. And I liked the windmill and the wire coming up to the house, into the wall, electricity blowing the fan. But then also, there's wind coming through the window. This was done about the time that Obama got elected. We were right at the kind of recovering from a pretty severe economic slide. To me, it seemed that the people in this building were able to get along. There's an indication that they might not have their electricity. They're being kind enough to feed a cat. And they've got, things in their house to make them happy. They've got plants in the window and coffee to drink, look out the window. And then here's the obvious person with way, way, way more money somewhere. And then basically begging. Another one that gets a little political here. I don't really like anybody in this picture except for Jimmy Carter. And one of the things about this one I thought is that we just keep battling and battling over a lot of things that seem to be connected with money. And at the same time, we tend to ignore some pretty obvious things that are happening, and that is polluting the environment. The ants is kind of an idea that I saw the Hellstrom Chronicles years ago. Talked about how the next thing after, we've had dinosaurs, we've had mammals, we've had the human race, and the next thing could quite possibly be insects, because they're very adaptable, and they would probably survive things that the human beings probably won't. The money tree I think I used the copy machine in the lounge and copied a few dollar bills so that I could cut up. So a teacher friend of mine walks in and is like, "Charlie, I don't think that's going to work." So this painting up here kind of inspired, well, if we want the whole story here real quickly, on the left we have the border crossing. There's the man with a suspiciously long tie with dollar signs on it. We have this person with the purse that's looking shocked on one hand, but yet willing to walk away and turn a blind eye on the other. There's two children crossing the border and looking all excited and happy. One is. The other one is in tears because of what's going on. Here's all these really bad people that are working in the subway station. And a daughter lives in Queens, New York. And it's economic or culturally diverse areas in the country. And I like the idea of the subway station. And I started with the one on the left and then ended up becoming a triptych. So there's the people that are out earning money, playing music and juggling, what have you, in the subway station. And then on the right side, we have the guy taking a selfie with the hood on. Now, when I was in grade school, they talked about this stuff, and these guys used to sneak around in the dark, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're hearing these stories in grade school. Did that really happen? Well, now they march down the street in the middle of the day. And so that's why I got him taking a selfie. And then there's some, a finger pointed at maybe some mixed messages between religion and other things. And then on the very right-hand side, indigenous and Native American, whose pockets are picked clean, and has had things taken from him. Now, I'm not going to be this political all the way through. We have a gluttony on one side and trying to squash the press on the other. And this is the 2016 phase. This is not current. Current is becoming a little harsher reality. Here I've got fighting the wrong fight, people from opposite sides wrestling, tussling over an issue. And while that's going on, I'm thinking of the beauty of our universe being ignored. 2020 came along. There was an opening. And that was the thing. People were supposed to bump elbows to say hello. This painting was shown at Mankato State during 2020, 2021 early. And it was fun getting a show there, but nobody could go to it because the school's locked down. Oh yeah, the Art Center one was locked down too. So those were these circle heads. How do you draw a head? And there, how to draw a head. This one is at Emily Stark, who's a prof over at MSU in the psych department, I believe, and she has this in her office. I think we all had bats in our heads in 2020 by the time everything was just so shut down and so restricted. So I made happy paintings for a little while. And just for fun paintings. Stories about skinny dipping back, way back when. Late at night. This one, a friend of mine picked up. It's just working with colors, I think, and red bird shapes. Okay. My printmaking stage was kind of somewhat of a turning point. I got involved in printmaking because of school, of doing it with kids, and also at a art ed conference got turned on to some materials I hadn't used before or knew about. And so after I retired, I started doing the prints, and I started using the clay studio in St. Peter. Oh. This is soft cut linoleum, and you can see the blade. You're pulling it, and that's much safer than the kinds that you push. I remember doing that with junior high, and it was it only happened a few times, but I sent kids to school, sent them to the doctor for stitches because it's like, Mr. Putnam, oh man, you need to go see a doctor. So. I was able to do this with kids with like down as low as 2nd or 3rd grade. And they could carve this stuff pretty easily. And it was safe. And then they would make they would make prints, and then they would also press that into a little clay piece. Of course, you've got 50 minutes basically for them to do the clay piece, so you had to have it organized. And basically I was doodling with a knife. That led to a residency over in New Ulm at the Cellar Press. during the time of the residency, there was a flood. We got a foot of water in Mankato in the afternoon, and the Rapidan Dam broke. And so I'm just starting my residency, and I'm getting calls from people, Charlie, is your house going to be okay? I'm kind of over by the river. And I think, well, I think we're going to be okay. And I waited a couple of days. I finally went over there. I had people checking it out. But you could only get into St. Peter from one direction. And that was from New Ulm, from the west. You couldn't get in there from the south, north, or east at all. So at the picture that was taken was 169 at 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, there's no cars out there. There's nobody going through. And that's why I had fun and put Rod Serling in there. Oh. The cellar press is really an amazing space. Oh, how did this happen again? Whoa, it is kind of like the Twilight Zone. How did this happen? Okay. Am I stuck on a loop here? Okay, there's one pressed into clay, and you can see the image is reversed. And also it's backwards. Any line that's dug in deep ends up being a line popping out on the clay. I did some cylinders like the ones that the students did. Okay. That's supposed to spin around here. It didn't. That's okay. I also did some rubbings. I took some images. I took this image and turned it as a stand-up image. And I think the title is Mother Knows Best or something, kind of a takeoff on the movie Psycho. I also did some things with my iPad. And then there's this. I had messed around with cardboard and paints. I went and got some lumber cheap, like 20 bucks worth of lumber. I dumpster dived for some cardboard and ended up putting that together. I'm really happy how that I was a little worried about that. Okay, gel plates. I think this is me on my uncle's tractor. I was asked to get involved with working with gel plates to do a class over in New Ulm. And so the best way to learn something is to have to teach it to someone else. And I ended up using the gel plates for collages. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and one of the funnest things that I saw was how excited the person doing the video was about taking a sheet, you're doing your print in front of you, and then off to the side was a place to clean off your brayer, you do a second or third print, and play around a little bit more with the papers that you're printing on. And some really exciting things were happening. And so, digging through my scrap pile, I found this one and I really liked that, so I framed it. And this is a bunch of those prints I cut up and put together. And I was kind of happy about that fence. Another thing I've got involved in is painting on Yupo, which is it's almost like it's a synthetic paper. It's like plastic, and you use a liquid paint on top of it, and so it's kind of like watercolors on steroids. And instead of having the paper will dry and pull water out of that paint, this stuff just sits there and dries, and it moves around. And so sometimes if I paint before I go to bed, I'll wake up in the morning and go look at it, and I've got a different painting there. Sometimes that's good, sometimes not so much. And that's one that I just finished. Teaching, trying to do sculpture with kids. No budget, no space. Shop teacher had boxes full of scrap wood. And so we'd build sculptures using scraps. This one was made with dryer lint over the top of some screen. I had students, when they were making their masks, one day I had these two junior high girls that were painting with these little bottles of puff paint. What is that stuff, I'm asking? They told me what it was and that their mom had it or something. And they were using it on their projects. I thought, geez, that looks like fun. So probably by that weekend, I'm at the fabric store buying bottles of puff paint. Now the one on the right was destroyed in a fire, and I think both of these were at a show here back in the 90s, whenever that was, when this building first opened. These two are here. Once again, puff paint on that side, and the other one were just random junk. I had two movies that I showed kids about to encourage collages. And then we would make our own papers. So we've got Eric Carl, Omar Bearden. The one on the right was one of my students. She got done with her project. She was second or third grade. She made this bunny in a bamboo forest. And then the other one was, it looks like I used some kind of a scraper for part of that body. And maybe a gasket or something for the head. Once again, the scrap heap. And my own scrap heap at home. Picture day. I always think of those little kids coming in for their pictures. Their hair would be all perfect. They'd be all dressed up. They'd even have ties on and stuff. You'd take those pictures right away in the morning, because after lunch, no. They're not going to look that slick anymore after playing on the playground. The one on the left was sold to some friends that live down in North Carolina. They're musicians. They spend their winters in Mexico doing music. They asked about that painting, and I said, well, this is how much I'd sell it for, but then I'd have to charge you for shipping. They said, hey, we're coming to Minnesota. We're going to be playing some music. Perfect. So they were able to take it home. The one in the middle I just finished kind of ended up looking like Maynard. Kind of reminded me of Maynard G. Krebs for some reason. I'm not sure why. And probably only a few of us remember who that was. That's it. There you go. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was that long. I'm sorry. Kind of rambled on. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Charlie. We've got some refreshments waiting for you yonder. If you'd help us move some chairs back at your leisure, we can get the gallery opened up and you can spend some time with the artwork. Charlie will still be around to answer your questions. Thanks.